Hi everyone. So if you've done a Scolio fitness session with me before or watched any of my lives, then you know that I actually talk about breath work quite a bit because breathing is going to impact us in so many different ways. So today I have a guest joining me with Breath Body Therapy. There he is. I'm going to have him join us to talk about breath work and how it's going to impact, let's see, just try to how going to impact like our stress, our anxiety, everything. There you go. I was like trying to see how you can add you. Perfect. All right. So there you go. Hi Campbell, how are you?
I'm very well, Viv. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for joining today.
I'm excited to be chatting.
Yeah, for sure. So I just want to do a quick introduction, then I'll hand it over to you. So Campbell he's a breathwork coach. He's a Wim Hof instructor, a breathwork facilitator from Australia. So can you tell us a little bit more about your work and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. I got into this sort of work through being a physical therapist. I was actually a respiratory physical therapist for a period. And I had one of those catalyst moments where I can still really remember it, but I was working with a quite ill patient in the ICU where we were just going to go just for a very, very short walk. And the effort that it was required from him, and he looked at me and just said, when you can't breathe, nothing else matters. And that really sort of stuck with me. And it sort of pointed to the power and the importance of breath, but also the potential. I saw this big sort of disconnect with kind of what got people to functional versus reaching their full potential. And I saw a big piece of that being the way that we breathe and the way that we use our breath. And so that sort of put me, I often say it's this never-ending rabbit hole that I'm still going down, just of discovering all of the wonderful ways that we can apply breath, whether it's for our emotional regulation, whether it's for our stress, our resilience, our performance and recovery, our sleep. There's really nothing that isn't affected by the way that we breathe. So it's been a really interesting journey and shining this light for people and noticing that when they take back power and control of their breath, they really are able to take back control of their life.
Yeah, no, that's super powerful. I think it's something that everyone just assumes it's automatic, right? So then you don't really think about it. But there are so many ways that, like you said, that it's going to impact us in so many different areas of our life.
Yeah, and I always really like to point, because we often think that, well, I'm breathing, what could I be doing wrong? But automatic does not mean optimal. And it's the same with, we could look at someone's gait, the way they walk. It really is any behavior we have. Just because it's automatic doesn't mean I'm doing it right, or at least to my full potential. So I always say that to people, just because you are doing it all the time doesn't mean you can't improve it. And when we start to look a little bit further into even just the basics of breathing, and you're starting to look at how can I optimize this thing that I do 25,000 times every day. And if I'm not doing that right, there is going to be a flow-on effect.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it's also just because something is common, right? It doesn't mean it's normal. It's kind of like along that same kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So I guess I think there's been a lot more coming up about like breath work, right? So there's, I think just like with meditation, so people are trying to incorporate the breath work there, or with yoga. And then I know that you do Wim Hof and everything too. So what are, I guess, like some of the differences that you help people, just kind of the different types of breath work that you kind of lead people through?
Yeah, I think it's super important that people understand that, because one, breathwork's not new. Okay, it's really, really old. It's 5,000 years old. It sort of started in pranayama tradition, but if you look in Eastern medicine, there's versions of what we call breathwork, but they would call prana or chi or ki. And I guess in the sort of modern, there's been resurgence of interest, scientific and just popular interest in what we call breathwork. And there's literally hundreds of different methods out there, and it can be a bit confusing for people. It's like, where do I start? Because there is 1,001 different ways to do something. So I really like to point people to, instead of looking at the method, i.e. Wim Hof method or transformational breath, conscious connected breathing, or the list goes on, is trying to look at the principles. We all have a nervous system. We all have physiology. We all have our biomechanics. And really every method out there is tweaking one of those variables. The way that I breathe is having an effect on my nervous system. It's doing something to my physiology. The mechanics that I'm using have a flow-on effect. So if I can understand the principles, then it allows me a little bit more or at least a better informed choice of like, well, what practice is better for me? And it really came to light in where I teach. I'm from a smallish town in Australia. It's pretty relaxed. It's pretty chill. And the Wim Hof method, I found a lot of people got great value out of. It sort of charges you up. It gives you lots of energy. When I got to New York City and I was teaching the Wim Hof method, these people are already stressed. They're already strung out. A lot of them have anxiety. So a technique like the Wim Hof method that is more stressful, it's more activating, wasn't the best suited for them. And I realized when I started teaching down regulation practices that people were falling asleep. People were like, oh, I've never felt so relaxed. And so it's like, where am I at? Am I someone that is in a heightened response? Am I a little bit stressed, anxious? Maybe I need to look to a practice that's going to calm my nervous system versus something that's going to ramp it up even more. And the other end of the spectrum, maybe I find I wake up in the morning and I'm really slow to get started and there's a little bit of a sort of heaviness. Maybe I do need something like the Wim Hof method that's going to kind of fire up the engines. So it's really about what do I need, and then understanding, well, what form of breathwork practice is going to meet those sort of needs.
Okay, got it. And I'm sure that everyone that watches either live, hi everyone, thanks for joining today, and anyone that catches the replay later, thank you as well. I think everyone's probably been tried some type of breathwork before or heard about it. But I guess can we back up a little bit? I forgot to kind of mention this earlier, just kind of, since it is part of the autonomic nervous system. So how do we, I guess, turn it upregulate, downregulate, what you're kind of mentioning right now?
Yeah, for sure. And that's honestly, out of all I teach, I think nervous system self-regulation is a very important piece. It's not something many of us are taught, but it really dictates what state is my body in. And we know with the autonomic nervous system, we have these two branches, the sympathetic nervous system being that kind of fight and flight response. And most people have heard of fight or flight response. Mm-hmm. And the opposite being the parasympathetic, and that's that more rest and digest and repair. But I think what's really important for people to know about those two states of the nervous system is they kind of work in opposition, all right? But it's a spectrum. I'm kind of more towards the sympathetic, more towards the parasympathetic. I can't really be both at the same time. And often what we think about with the autonomic nervous system, evolutionarily, that sympathetic state, that fight or flight response was what got me out of danger. A tiger comes out of the bushes and I need to run away. My heart rate increases, my blood flow goes out to the muscles, my breathing increases because it's a very stressful situation. The idea being, once I get away from that tiger, my nervous system shifts back into that recovery state. And it's in the parasympathetic state that a lot of processes of repair and restoration and inflammation occur. But we're no longer dealing with tigers. When's the last time we had a tiger come out of the bushes at us? Probably never. But we're dealing with deadlines and emails and conversations and poor sleep and stimulus. And so a lot of people are kind of stuck in that sympathetic nervous system. It's like the foot's on the accelerator. And that means that all of these wonderful processes that body has of recovery and repair will not occur, okay? Because it's kind of like this hierarchy. And if my body thinks I'm being attacked by a tiger, then the inflammation doesn't matter. I need to survive in this moment. And so it's less about that really drastic stress response. But if I'm in a heightened state for prolonged periods, I am relegating tasks in my body that are really going to help for my longevity. And where it comes back to breath is one of the influences on the state of nervous system I find myself in is my breathing. Right? We have all been perhaps in a situation that's a little bit scary or frightening. And so the breath is reflecting what's happening in the environment. And my nervous system takes that information. Now, what happens if I'm sitting reading an email and I'm breathing faster than I need to? I'm breathing through my mouth. I'm creating that sympathetic trigger. And maybe I don't recognize that. And I will say, this makes me feel stressed, or this situation makes me feel anxious, when in part, it's actually the way that I'm breathing that's creating that response. Anxiety and a feeling of stress is the correct response if I'm breathing that way. But if I don't notice my breathing is creating that, then I'm kind of at a loss and I'll blame everything on the situation. So to boil it down into the simple points, when we breathe through our mouth, when we breathe quickly, when we breathe high up into our chest, and when we put emphasis on the inhale, are all going to create more of a sympathetic response in the nervous system. And a great example of this is, if you've ever seen someone having a panic attack, it's all inhale, it's in the chest, it's quickly, it's very fast. All right? And so that's that really heightened sympathetic response. And then all of the opposite is true for the parasympathetic. When I breathe with my nose, when I breathe slowly, when I use my diaphragm, and when I emphasize the exhale, I'm going to push that needle back towards parasympathetic. And it's a really simple thing. And if I understand those triggers, then I'm very empowered. All right. Something that makes me feel anxious or stressed, I can think, how am I breathing? All right. Maybe I'm breathing a bit too quickly. Maybe I'm holding my breath. Maybe I'm breathing up into the shoulders. I can control all of those things. I have conscious control over, am I using my nose or my mouth? Am I breathing into my shoulders and chest or my belly? Am I breathing fast or slow? And am I prioritizing or emphasizing the inhale or the exhale? And we can use those triggers to kind of self-regulate a little bit and direct ourselves back to a state of calm.
Okay. So are those kind of like the main things that you have have people kind of check in with, like when they kind of notice that?
Yeah, so I love to get people to perform a breath check. And it's fascinating when you look, I mean, if we think about how many times do we check our phone every day? It's a very, very big number, more than we should. How many times do we check our breathing? Most people say 0. Right? And so I love to put this little challenge to people. Whenever you check your phone, also just check your breathing. It takes literally 3 or 4 seconds. It's not like you need to stop what you're doing and doesn't require any equipment. It's just attention. So I think number 1, nose or mouth. Okay, if I'm breathing through my mouth, I close it and I bring my breath back through my nose. Number 2, I place a hand on my chest and a hand on my belly and I see the location of my breath. If I can feel the shoulders rising, the chest elevating, then I've got an opportunity to try and send that breath down into the bottom hand. Can I breathe into the belly? And number 3, fast or slow. And it really doesn't matter. You can always slow down your breath. So 1 conscious breath is enough to kind of down-regulate the nervous system. So if I can, every time I check my phone, which is maybe 30, 40, 50, 100 times a day for some people, I'm also checking my breath, then I'm ensuring I'm creating this little neurological groove that every time I revert to nasal, diaphragmatic, and slow breathing, that is going to become a habit. And that's where we start to see really powerful change. And it's the same way that I would teach someone about posture, right? The idea of good posture is not to sit up straight all day. You'll just get sore somewhere else. It's about recognizing when you're in a poor posture and fixing it, all right? And then, the next time I'm in a poor posture, I remind myself. So every time I catch my breathing that's perhaps non-optimal, I make that very simple change of nasal, diaphragm slowly, and soon enough, it will become automatic. You'll go to check your breath, and you're already breathing through your nose. There's a gentle expansion of your belly, and you're breathing slowly. Wonderful. We've got the nervous system a little bit happier.
Awesome. No, that's great. I love that. I'm a big person, big into like setting alarms on my phone. So this is even better. It's like just every time you check your phone, check in with your breath. And everyone like watching also, because most of the people on my page are have scoliosis, and we kind of work with that. So also just to note, like if we're breathing out of our nose versus our mouth, that's actually going to impact your posture as well. So for everyone watching, like it's kind of good to kind of check in with those things. It's like simultaneously. So kind of goes all together.
Yeah, and it's one of those really interesting things. Like when we think about breathing, but also posture, also your cardiovascular system, also your lymphatics, like all of these other flow-on effects of optimizing one thing. It's like this low-hanging fruit that if I can fix or at least optimize the breathing, what other systems in my body are going to be affected by that? Posture is a fantastic example. But also these other things that we quote unquote are autonomic or automatic, but are regulated or at least influenced by my breath.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. No, I love that tip. Thank you for explaining and kind of going more in depth about the nervous system and everything too. Awesome. So then I guess like now when you like, what are, just like, I guess like when people are doing this, I know that a lot of times they think that they have to be like in a yoga class or kind of winding down at night before they kind of check in with the breath. And so I know that you're really big on, like you said, with these tips of checking in with your breath, but can we do breath? Like, do you recommend people do breath work like right there? Like what kind of, there's like a different ways to incorporate throughout the day.
Yeah, I love to sort of break, and this is just my own take on it, but I love to kind of categorize. In one hand, we have so-called functional breath work. This is like my day-to-day. This is when I notice my breathing's maybe not great and I can fix it. But that's very different to something like, the Wim Hof method, which requires me to huff and puff, and it's very obvious, it's very active. I'm not going to be able to do that in a shopping center or in a meeting or around other people. It's just not applicable. So I think categorizing and letting yourself have elements of both practices, like my functional breathing, oh, I noticed I'm holding my breath, or I noticed I'm breathing a little bit rapidly, or whatever it might be. What can I do in this moment? And again, I think the first step for most people is actually noticing. It's that kind of catch-22 that you can't change it if you don't know when you're doing it. But having that simple mantra, I love to use low, slow, and through the nose. That of like when I notice, or maybe I'm feeling a little bit anxious or there's tension in my body, that can be a little reminder, and I can think low, slow, through the nose. And I can have that functional breathing that I know is going to balance my physiology. It's going to calm my nervous system. It's going to encourage good posture and good biomechanics. But then it's also, I think, as important for people to have more of a therapeutic breathwork practice. And that's maybe I have had a day where there's lots of stress or I feel emotional, whatever it might be, having a conscious practice that allows me to sort of dive into that and to use some of these techniques to move some of that energy, to release some of that tension. But that's a very different practice. Like, you would never breathe the way that you breathe in a therapeutic practice all day, because it's it's you're breathing over your metabolic demands. You're breathing more than you need to for your required sort of moment. So it's sort of recognizing that one is a conscious practice that maybe lasts 15, 20, 30 minutes, okay? And one is how I'm breathing for that 20, 25,000 times every day. And they are very, very different.
Right. No, that makes sense. Especially, I guess, like what you're saying, you can't just kind of go into that like at any point, right? But how would you, I guess, like get into that breath work, like when you're kind of trying to work through the stress or the anxiety?
Yeah, so I love to teach people and at least point to this relationship between physiology and psychology. They are intertwined, right? When your physiology is stressed out, as is your mind. If your physiology is racing, as is your mind. And if your physiology is calm and balanced, as is your mind. So again, number one step is kind of noticing. But I really love to give people very simple, effective, and short practices. One of my favorites is something called the physiological sigh, which has just come out of Stanford. There's a really interesting researcher that they look at the fear networks in the brain and what happens with our vision and with our breathing. And they've found we have this little cluster of neurons in the brainstem that they're actually called sigh neurons. And we unconsciously sigh about 12 times an hour. And that's an attempt of our body to balance our physiology. Like, that's my way of trying to off-gas a bit of carbon dioxide. But why wait until your body responds that way when we can consciously kind of hijack that system? So the physiological sigh is probably the most evidence-based way to balance your physiology. And I love to sort of point to it's a lot easier to control physiology than it is to control psychology. Right? Sometimes when we're trying to use the mind to control the mind, we get a little bit stuck in the mind. So why not take a hold of the body and the breathing to influence the mind? So the physiological sigh, we take sort of a comfortably full breath in through the nose. We take a little pause, and then we top it up with a second breath. And we let a soft, easy exhale out. And we really let the diaphragm relax. We let the breath taper off. And again, we'll take a comfortable breath in, a little pause, second inhale, and relaxed exhale. So that even one time or 3 times or 5 times is guaranteed to affect your physiology. And what's happening is we breathe in, that second breath in actually props open all the little alveoli, these little balloons that we have in our lungs, hundreds of millions of tiny little balloons. And that second inhale pops them all open. And then all of the carbon dioxide jumps from the blood into the alveoli. And we breathe it out, but that slow breath out helps the vagus nerve and the carbon dioxide begin to build back up. So it's sort of this little reset button for your physiology. And how often do we catch ourselves feeling frustrated or anxious and we're holding the breath or sighing? Okay, this is my body's way of trying to balance. But instead of getting to that point where it's a reaction, I can be proactive and I can perhaps perform one of those every 5 or 10 minutes, or notice when I'm feeling tension or my mind is racing, that I can have that as a bit of a, oh, there's my little exercise that can help balance physiology.
Okay. And do you always recommend kind of exhaling out of the mouth in that situation? Were you doing this?
Yeah, for most people that exercise, we have a little bit, well, most people have a little bit more control of their lips rather than their throat or their airways or their diaphragm. So some people struggle to do a controlled long exhale through the nose. So I often say, imagine you're breathing out through a straw. That's going to hold the air back a little bit more easily. People that have a pranayama practice, that practice ujjayi breath, have that ability to perhaps restrict the air from the throat, or they have very good diaphragmatic control, then I would recommend doing it out through the nose. But there's something that happens when we, it's a little bit more exaggerated, it's a bit more obvious. We feel the body respond a little bit more. So I think if the situation allows for it, you really let it go.
Yeah, well, yeah. So it's kind of like definitely just depends on the situation, and then if you can do it, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really important because maybe we're in the middle of a meeting and we can't. So that's when these techniques are still very effective, and I can still do them through the nose. It's sort of like, well, what am I allowed to do in this setting? But doing it all through the nose is a little bit more beneficial in my mind in terms of physiology. But I also feel that there's a bit of an embodied release when we can really let go and have a big audible sigh.
Yeah, it definitely feels different when you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of the sessions that I teach, we always start with, we do a lot of on the diaphragmatic breathing, and kind of do a little bit of that like sigh at first, but then work a lot with the exhale, just kind of with the mouth closed, just kind of help with that posture. Because you notice how when you're sighing, you kind of just like your body kind of drops versus kind of continuing to lift. So
yes, exactly.
So a little bit with that. So, and then when you're, so that's more kind of like to relax your body a bit, right? That's really interesting. I never knew about that. Like the sigh, like neurons are like in the brainstem with that. It's very fascinating.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And they're learning more and more of these little clusters of neurons in the brainstem. There's something called the Botzinger complex, which they thought was sort of controlling the breathing, but they've now discovered it's more spying on the breathing, and it has connections to all these other parts of the brain. So, and that's why it's so interesting that when we breathe rapidly, we feel a little bit stressed because that little part of the brain, that little part of the brainstem is sending information all throughout the brain saying, our breathing has got faster, it's got rapid, it's got shallow, turn on, get prepared, something's happening. And the same way that when we breathe really smooth and steady and slow, we often feel a sense of relaxation because that little thing that's spying on our breathing is telling the rest of the brain what's happening out there.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so I guess like when people are trying to like kind of like get prepared for something, right? So then it's more, so that's why you would do something like the Wim Hof method or like kind of regulating or like those principles.
Yeah, exactly. Those principles. So perhaps breathing a little bit faster, perhaps taking some nice deep inhales, maybe doing some breath holds. Again, maybe I've only got a couple of minutes and I can't sit down and do 3 rounds of the Wim Hof method, but I love to do this kind of upside down triangle breathing where I can breathe in and I can hold the breath. And when I hold the breath at the top of the inhale, it's very stimulating. Okay, then I can take an active exhale and then straight back in. So I'm kind of emphasizing the inhale. I'm holding at the top, which stretches the little baroreceptors in the lungs. Again, it feeds into the brain and says stimulus. And then I let that exhale go. So that's a nice simple way that maybe I need 3 or 5 breaths. It's going to perk me up a little bit because the way that we breathe and that arousal system in the brain, the inhale holds, the more emphasis on the inhale is going to turn the lights on a little bit.
Okay. So like if you're getting a little bit sleepy in the afternoon, but you need to focus on work or something, it's kind of good to do something like that.
Yeah, so nice big strong inhales, maybe emphasizing the inhales, perhaps holding the breath at the top of the breath rather than the bottom, so lungs inflated, are all going to push us more towards that sympathetic state. And again, everyone's got their own kind of gauge. Maybe I need to breathe through the mouth, it's going to be a little bit more. Maybe I need to breathe quickly, it's going to be a little bit more. But that's where I really invite people to kind of try these on for size. Because everyone's different. Your breath is really like your fingerprint. And we could take 10 people and tell them all to breathe in the same pattern. And 3 people might feel anxious, 3 people might feel alert, 3 people might feel sleepy because it's their nervous system. So it really is this exploration of like, well, when I breathe like this, what do I feel like? And then you can start to develop this understanding of like, all right, now I know what makes me feel alert and what makes me feel calm. And I can use those as needed.
Okay. No, I really like that because I think everyone thinks that there's one thing, like everyone's doing this, so I have to do it too. Or this is like
Yeah.
trendy, or this is what my yoga teacher is telling me to do in class. But then it's like, I know sometimes when you're trying to focus on it too much, like for me, and like it's harder for me to hold the breath. Then I start panicking or something, right? So then I'm not actually like relaxing. So that doesn't help me as much.
Yeah, I think one thing that's so true for breathwork and almost everything in life, but it's not one size fits all. And I think once people understand that, because I've had so many people come to me that are like, I tried the Wim Hof method and it made me feel more anxious. And it's like, well, it's not that you're doing it necessarily wrong, just perhaps it's not the right technique for you. And people get a little bit disheartened and like, breathwork's not for me because I tried it and it didn't work. Well, it did work. It just didn't do what you wanted it to do because perhaps it was the wrong technique for your desire. And so if anyone has tried any breath work and they think, oh, it's not for me, I'd really encourage them to perhaps try a different technique, perhaps reach out to a breathwork coach and find out what actually works for you and think about those principles of nervous system and how you breathe is really important because it does work, so to speak. Like your breathing is the thing that influences your nervous system. It's just if you understand that, then you can make the sort of necessary tweaks.
Okay. So would you say that there's like a correct way of breathing then? Or is it more just like very individualized, I guess?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And one of my teachers sort of points to there is no such thing as incorrect breathing. There is incorrect breathing for the situation that you're in. Like if you're sitting on the couch and you're breathing 25 times a minute through your mouth, then that's not appropriate. So that would be incorrect breathing. But if you were doing that same breathing and you were running to help with an emergency or something, then that breathing's perfect. That's correct. So it's the context. It's really not that one pattern of breath is wrong. It's that, is it tailored to what I'm doing right now? Okay. And if it's not, then it is quote unquote incorrect. But I don't think it's fair to say that there's good breathing or bad breathing. It's like, is it relevant to what I'm doing? Yes or no? And I think that's a better question or a better answer is to know that all forms of breath are appropriate and valid for different situations. Is it valid for what I'm doing right now in the situation that I'm in?
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think it's also like trusting your body also, right? Because the way that you're breathing is telling you about something so that you can reconnect, like what you mentioned before.
Yeah.
And our breath, our bodies are so amazing, and just like our brain, like everything is just so, it's like the connection between it all. So like trusting our body as well, and then being able to support it in the best way possible, versus just going through the motions of, getting stressed when you're scrolling through something on Instagram and you see something that's like riling you up, when it's like, what should that be? Right. So like you're not running from a tiger. So like, let's figure out why.
It's a perfect example. And I always like to think like, you just portrayed that so beautifully, but like your body's always talking to you. It's always sending you messages. But if we haven't learned to listen to those messages, or we've learned to ignore them, which a lot of people have, then I missed those cues. And so like you said, it's really like noticing, oh, I'm breathing this way. Perhaps what I'm viewing or consuming is making me feel a bit stressed. But if I didn't notice the subtle change in my breath, then I'm going to miss that subtle cue. And it's going to have an effect on me that perhaps I don't notice. Maybe I don't sleep well that night, or whatever it might be. I'm a bit more reactive or snappy. It's because I didn't recognize the signal or the message from my body, from my breath, that said this thing is making me feel a certain way. And when we learn to tune into that, it really gives us so much more control over the way we feel and the way we think and the actions we take. So I think it's a really important lesson of becoming aware of those subtle changes that occur.
Yeah. And I think right now too, just with the seasons, like everyone's getting like allergies or everything too. And then just kind of like that impacts the breathing, but then also just, the past year of wearing masks and that impacts breathing too. Like, what recommendations do you have for that?
Yeah, allergies is a really interesting one. It's an immune response, and nasal breathing is really, I think it's one of the most overlooked things that a lot of people aren't even aware when they're breathing through their mouth. But our nasal mucosa is lined with cilia. It is literally the first line of our immune defense. It has these little hairs that are there to trap particles. So a lot of the times if I'm breathing through the mouth, those little pathogens and particles and bacteria get into the lungs. And then it's a lot harder work for my lungs to get them back out. So really ensuring that I do breathe through my nose almost 99% of the day, really, in and out through the nose, is going to utilize the nose for what it is. It also humidifies the air, it conditions the air, it spirals it and brings it into the lower part of the lungs, like all of these wonderful things. Nose is designed for breathing, mouth is designed for communicating and eating, but a lot of people kind of hijack that system and we breathe through the mouth. And that makes it a lot harder on my sinuses, on my respiratory system. So number one, I'd say just ensuring that I'm breathing in and out of the nose kind of at all times of the day, except for high level physical activity or if I'm talking. But number two, there's an interesting molecule called nitric oxide that is actually produced locally in the paranasal sinuses. It is a really potent vasodilator and bronchodilator, which means it opens the airways. Again, if I'm breathing through the mouth, I completely bypass that and I don't bring the nitric oxide into the upper airways. Simple things like humming, so long exhales, humming on the exhales is going to stimulate those sinuses and it's going to produce a lot more nitric oxide. So that's a really nice way to ensure that my airways are responding to the way they should be, and I can kind of hijack that system a little bit. Nitric oxide is always going to do, it's antibacterial, it's antiviral, it's antifungal, like it's a really interesting molecule that we can only utilize if we're breathing through the nose.
Okay. And would you, I guess, like recommend that for with asthma and stuff as well? So it's kind of just like that nitric oxide is going to help a lot with that too.
Yeah, and a really interesting point, particularly on asthma and other kind of respiratory disease, is there's a very often overlooked relationship with carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is also a vasodilator and a bronchodilator, which means it maintains the airways and the blood vessels. Now, when I'm having an asthma attack, anyone that has experienced asthma, and the breathing gets shorter and tighter and faster, and what I'm doing really interestingly is I'm breathing out all of the carbon dioxide. Really what I need to be doing is retaining the carbon dioxide because it's going to open the blood vessels and it's going to open the airways. But you tell someone having an asthma attack to hold their breath and it's the scariest thing they can do because they feel like they're running out of air already and you tell them to stop breathing and it feels like, what are you telling me to do? But again, if we understand the role of carbon dioxide in our airways and in our blood vessels, then slowing down the breathing, coming back to nasal breathing, and even having a conscious practice, like outside of an asthma attack, but practicing my ability to tolerate increased levels of carbon dioxide. So there's some simple exercises that allow us to sort of let the body become a little bit more accustomed to increasing and decreasing levels of carbon dioxide. The easiest way is breathe less than you want to. Right? So if I breathe slower, if I breathe softer, if I breathe more quietly, at a point I'm going to feel kind of this urgency. It's like I want to breathe more. I kind of want to gasp and sigh. That's exactly where you want to be. That is your brain responding and saying there's too much carbon dioxide in the body. Okay, but if I can get used to that, then I'm teaching my body how to keep the airways open and the blood vessels open. So it's a gradual practice, but getting in touch with this air hunger, like whenever we go for a run or we walk up a set of stairs and there's that huffing and puffing is me trying to blow off the carbon dioxide that I'm producing from the muscles, right? So again, if I can perhaps breathe through the nose when I do physical activity, and I can feel that it's not very comfortable, which is why most people don't like to do it. It feels a little bit like anxious. It feels a little bit agitated. It's not a lovely feeling. But again, we can become accustomed. That sensitivity can come down and my body will learn to deliver oxygen better, to transport nutrients better, to remove waste rocks better, because I'm keeping all of those little vessels open and the airways open.
Okay, got it. So a good way to do that is like when you're exercising, going up the stairs, whatever, try not to breathe out of your mouth. Always breathe out of your nose. And then that will hopefully help just kind of with the future.
Yeah.
Kind of.
And it's quite a quick turnaround for your body to adapt to that. And so I always say to people, and it's sometimes a bit of a blow to the ego because as humans, we like to do stuff hard and fast and strong. And instead of letting your breathing catch up to the intensity, I see so many people go for a run and with the first 100 yards, they're, okay, that's not ideal. Okay. Instead, can we regulate our intensity to match how we're able to breathe? Okay. If I can't keep nasal breathing, and it can be forceful, it can be like, it doesn't have to be quiet and soft, but if I can't keep my mouth closed, I'm probably going too hard. I'm running too fast. I'm pushing too much. I'm doing too much because my body is shifting into this very inefficient pattern of breath. We move from aerobic to anaerobic. We start producing lactic acid. But again, nobody wants to slow down. Nobody wants to do less because it feels like I'm not performing as much. But it's a really quick turnaround. I see people of a week, it feels like I can't go as fast or as long. After that week, they can maintain nasal breathing and they're at the same level they were. Their recovery is much better. Like it's really interesting when we can increase our threshold of being able to breathe through the nose. I really optimize my cardiovascular system and my delivery and transport of oxygen.
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of just like what you wrote in so one of your posts is kind of that, like learning to run, like walk before you run, and just kind of like build up, right? So it's not rushing into something and then. And
it really is kind of like building the metabolic machinery almost. Like we are influencing the mitochondria and all of the parts of the body. So it's not that I'm like reducing my performance for no reason. I'm kind of breaking it down so I can build it back up better and stronger. And that's going to really benefit me in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's definitely just the way our world is. We're just like, we want to shortcut everything and jump to the next one. And everyone's doing this, I'm doing that, or I'm running, but slowing down. I always tell my Scolio Fitness members, everything is the importance of like slowing down to speed up your progress. Like in core work and just with your breath work, just with everything, right? So
yeah, I think it's something that's so important that's lost on a lot of people, that faster is better, harder is better, more is better. It's not.
Yeah.
I often say more is not better, better is better. And so learning how to breathe better, learning like the way your mechanics work and like refining that is going to give you so much more in the long run versus this sort of short term, oh, I can do this faster and harder.
Yeah, for sure. And then I know that you also work with, I guess like we've touched on a lot with like the stress and the anxiety and everything too. Is there anything, I guess like, and then that would obviously all tie in with sleep. But are there other like breathing techniques that you also like to teach or have people apply to help with their sleep?
Yeah, so I mean, sleep's such an interesting one. And again, I think we're at a place in society where like we try and like the quick fix. And for sleep, I don't find the quick fix works. Like sleep is really a reflection of how you managed yourself the previous 16, 18 hours.
Yeah.
And if I was hyperventilating all day, if I spent the day in front of screens, if I was stressed all day, then that's my nervous system in that really sympathetic state for a prolonged period. It's not that then just going to flip off at the end of the day because you want to go to bed. Your nervous system is meant to be this very dynamic on and off and stressed and relaxed and respond. And if I don't allow it to do that throughout the day, then I'm going to get stuck in that on state. So anyone that gets to the end of the day and that's their first moment of, oh, like what a day sort of thing. And then I have dinner, I watch TV and I try to go to bed.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that last hour or two of your day is not enough to influence how well you're going to sleep. I often say sleep starts in the morning. Like when you wake up, do you get a little bit of natural light, some sunlight? Do you move your body throughout the day? And are you having moments throughout the day to come back to your breath, to slow it down, to calm it down, to access that parasympathetic state? Because what you're teaching your nervous system is, how do I go between those gears? How do I go from the stress state, from the sympathetic nervous system, and how do I transition into that restful state? And if I only do that once at the end of the day, I'm not very good at doing it. And the people that sleep very lightly, that trouble to get to sleep, it to me is an indication that the sympathetic nervous system's just on. Right? So practicing throughout the day, just to take 2 or 3 minutes of really extending those exhales and breathing quietly and slowly and having a bit of internal awareness of like how I'm feeling, but accessing that more relaxed state momentarily throughout the day, at least for me personally and a lot of the people I work with, makes a huge difference to how you feel at the end of the day and your ability to actually be in that restful state before you go to bed.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love what you said about it starts like when you first wake up, right? That resetting your circadian rhythm, and just even if you just go to your window and just kind of get that sunlight for 15 minutes and do some deep breathing or just focusing on your breath then, right? And then kind of just helps to kind of set the tone for the day.
Yeah, it really does. And again, I think humans think we think things have to be complex and difficult to be effective, and they don't. And we're at that point of like, you see how many things are going back to basics, but like sunlight and fresh air and the way you breathe and the way you move, it doesn't need to be complex. You don't need special equipment. It's just investing a little bit of time into those practices. But how many people just roll out of bed and check the emails and off to work, and like, I haven't given myself any time to actually transition into the waking state.
Yeah.
And nor do I give myself time to transition into the resting state. It's kind of like, oh, I'm ready to go to bed and why can't I sleep? Or it's time to start the day, and like, I'm not respecting these sort of grace periods that the body loves and has. So I think starting with the simple things of like getting a bit of movement in every day, getting sunlight in your eyes in the morning, having a breath practice to calm your nervous system down are all going to influence the way that you sleep at night.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated, right? It's like those little
No.
that like just will have like big benefits at the end.
Exactly.
Awesome. And I know we had a couple questions. So we had a question from Diana about best breathing technique for panic attacks. And I know that we touched upon a little bit of that with the asthma. So would it be kind of the same?
Yeah, so panic attacks are very interesting. More or less, it's similar to what we were talking about with an asthma attack. But we also must respect what's happening in the nervous system. If you experience a panic attack, or you're near to experiencing a panic attack, if you just try and like implement a very slow breath practice, it's going to make you feel more panicked, okay? Because the breathing that's coming with your panic attack is reflecting something's happening, okay? This kind of heightened state, if I then just go really slow inhale, really slow exhale, it's like forcing a pattern on my body that does not fit for what's happening right now. So I love to think of meeting yourself where you're at, okay? Notice, all right, I'm feeling very panicked or stressed or anxious, and my breathing is doing whatever my breathing is doing. That might be different for different people. Find a pattern that's happening, okay? It's okay. So just sort of notice where you're at. And then step number one, make sure your exhale is the same as your inhale, okay? So if it's all inhale, I'm going to, and then I can start to get a little bit of control, and then maybe I can start to lengthen the exhale a tiny bit, a little bit longer. And so every breath, I'm just adding a tiny bit longer. And that's going to start to turn the nervous system down a little bit. But when I see people that are in that very heightened state, it's impossible for them just to jump down to a really calm pattern of breath. It doesn't work. Right? So we need to kind of catch ourselves where we're at, try and start to regulate that, keep it where it's at, meet your body, and then start to grab a hold of the steering wheel. It's like exhale the same as the inhale. Now exhale a bit longer, exhale a bit longer. Can I get myself down to the point where now it's exhales longer, then nasal in. So we sort of step ourselves back down towards a calm breath. That seems to be a lot more effective for people, but having those steps there is kind of reassuring. It's like, all right, the first thing I got to do is just control the breathing. Let it stay fast, let it stay a little bit chaotic, but you're controlling it rather than it's happening. Right now I'm controlling it, I can start to manipulate it a little bit. And then just piece by piece, breath by breath, I start to lengthen and slow down and bring a bit more of a regular rhythm to the breath.
Okay. No, I love that. Just kind of like the little steps instead of just like feeling so overwhelmed, kind of just, again, going to the opposite other side with it.
Yeah.
So I guess like the, she also kind of the follow-up. So I guess like the best technique to lengthen your exhale so that the inhales and exhales are more balanced. Is it more just kind of noticing it and?
Yeah, so your diaphragm is a muscle. The same way that I can control my elbow, I can control my diaphragm. It's a little bit trickier because a lot of us don't utilize our diaphragm to the best of our ability. Maybe that's from posture, maybe that's from low back pain, from pregnancy, from abdominal surgery. All of these things might contribute to the way that my diaphragm works. But it is a muscle that can be controlled. So practicing that outside of a panic attack, okay, maybe laying on the ground with your knees bent and placing a book or a pillow or a yoga block on your belly. Take a big breath in and let that belly rise, and then practice how slowly can you let that yoga block fall back down or that pillow fall back down. So if you notice I breathe in and then all the air falls out, there's not a lot of control there. I need to. So starting to practice consciously, what's your control of your diaphragm, right? It is a muscle, and we can learn to have a bit more control over that.
Okay. No, I love that. Yeah, just kind of all about that control and just kind of getting just that awareness and control, which makes a difference for everything like that we're talking about with it.
Yeah, it really is. Awareness and control is really like kind of what everything boils down to.
Yeah, for sure. So it's just taking that moment. Awesome. Thank you so much for going over all of this. And if anyone has any more questions, please pop them below. But if not, then I'll definitely will save this to my IGTV as well. So you gave us so many good tips. And I think that I love the just checking in with your breath when you first, like whenever you check your phone, and just kind of adding things in little bit by little, which would be great. Is there anything else that we haven't gone through that you want to kind of cover or?
Yeah, I think I always just love to give people that invitation. Like you don't have to start with a marathon. Start with awareness. Like notice how you breathe and try and correlate that with how you feel. And you'll notice some very interesting things. Like you'll notice this is my stressed pattern of breath. This is my content or relaxed pattern of breath. This is my excited breath. And once you start to, it's almost as if you learn to speak the language of your breath. Then you can implement, I'm going to breathe like I'm calm, and you will start to feel calm, okay? Because you've noticed that this breath is how I breathe when I'm calm, and this breath is how I breathe when I'm panicked, and they are very different. So starting with just, it seems very simple, but it's really powerful, of awareness. Like notice how you breathe in different times of day, when you're feeling different emotions, right? And start to develop a bit of a repertoire of like what your breath looks like when you're feeling different things. And then just, I think lots of people run before they walk. So start with making sure that you breathe through your nose all day, every day. Making sure that you breathe with your diaphragm. Making sure you breathe slowly before jumping perhaps into these more complex practices. Let's get the basics right. Because you do breathe 25,000 times a day. Getting those right is much more important than having one conscious practice that's the last 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. I think it's just people don't realize like how much they're actually breathing, right? So it's just kind of focusing on those other times throughout the day.
Yeah. And the more that you sort of create that little, like you set an alarm on your phone, and that's a great way to do it. But every time you kind of check in, you make it more likely that you'll check in. You kind of create this trigger, this neurological trigger, that you're more inclined to like check on your breathing. And the more you do that, the more you'll kind of optimize it, and it will just become this self-sustaining sort of pattern or habit.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. And Diana, I know you are talking about breathing for your curves, and I'm definitely going to touch upon that more next week in my newsletter and everything too. So stay tuned, more is coming on that. I wanted to talk to Campbell more on just like stress and anxiety, and then we'll tie in the scoliosis stuff next week. So stay tuned. And Campbell, how can everyone find you? And if they have any other questions or anything.
Yeah, so I'm at Breath Body Therapy. My website's the same. I'm very passionate about this stuff. So if anyone has questions, I really do encourage you to shoot me a message, shoot me an email. I don't bite. and take this as an opportunity to start looking into how, if you create change in your breath, how that might affect other parts of your life. But please don't hesitate to reach out.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time. Everyone who's watching or catching the replay, definitely apply these practices. Comment below. Let us know how you're feeling with everything too. We want to know how it's going for you with the breathing, and definitely reach out to Campbell if you have any questions. Thank you so much again for coming on and just sharing all your knowledge and your passion with us today.
Thanks a lot, Viv. I appreciate the time and share this energy in this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get to meet in person sometime soon. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Have a lovely day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.